Today we're going to talk about Lesson 3, when the Americans enter World War I in 1917. So when we come in, it was good timing because the Allies have been having a really terrible time. All that trench warfare has been really hard on them, and the submarines from the Germans have been really doing a good job ruining their food supply or war supplies by attacking their ships. And so they're really having a hard time. So we come in and we help a lot. One of the ways we do that is with that helping against the German submarines. Before we came in, they were sinking every one out of every four ships that left British ports. So that's a pretty high percentage getting lost. So when we come in, one of the biggest things we can do right away is with our Navy. We have our naval ships sail next to the merchant ships that are leaving British ports. And that way we're kind of like their protector. And that's called the convoy system, when a Navy ship goes with a merchant ship and kind of protects it, right? And then the U-boat probably won't risk it going against a naval ship. And so that worked, and so that a lot more of the Allies' supplies started getting through once we were there to help escort their ships through. All right. Another thing that helps with the Ally war effort is this doesn't help with the Allies, but that one of the big things that happen is that Russia actually leaves the Allies' side. There's been a lot going on in Russia. The Tsar, remember, the ruler, Nicholas II, he stepped down, right, in the revolution. Remember we talked about that? And so there was a temporary government, but they were not doing very well. There was a lot of problems, a lot of food shortages, there were a lot of rioting going on. People were so unhappy with it. The problems were lack of food and fuel. And so a new government takes over called the Bolsheviks, and they're led by a very famous guy, Vladimir Lenin. There's a picture of him right there on the page. They are going to set up a communist government, okay? And so they decide we need to focus on, fixing our country. It's a mess. We can't afford to be in this war anymore. So we're going to bow out. So they make a treaty on their own with Germany to get out of the war. And that's the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. And so they make that treaty. It's not a particularly good treaty for them, but they really want to get out. And the good news for the Russians now is, right, they don't have to fight on both fronts. Remember we talked about how they had thought that they would be quick on the Western Front and then move everything to the east when that didn't happen. Well, now it's like kind of the opposite. Well, now that Russia is not going to fight with them anymore on the Eastern Front, they can move all of their troops from the east to the west. So that's going to be bad news for the Allies, right? If the Germans can now focus all on the Western Front. And so at first it looks like that might work, that the Germans make this big push and are looking like they're doing well, unfortunately, against the Allies. And they start getting close to Paris. And then the Americans join in, right? And so the Americans, the general who's in charge of our forces in Europe is General John J. Pershing. The American forces were called the American Expeditionary Force, and he did not want us to mix in with the existing forces from other countries. He wanted to keep them separate, and so many of the Americans had a nickname called Doughboys. I've read over the years various different reasons why that might be. Your book goes with one possible solution, which is their buttons were kind of rounded and they looked like maybe dumplings. So that's why they're called Doughboys, because the dumplings are made out of dough. I'm not sure if I buy that or not, but anyway, so they were called Doughboys. That's true, American soldiers. Okay, so we are not going to go into too many of the battles. There are quite a few. There, with our help, the Allies start doing a little bit better again. And then there's one major famous battle that we are going to talk about called the Battle of Argonne Forest. This was a 7-weeker, very long, very terrible conditions. It's a lot of forest. It is a forest, right? So it's hard conditions. It's muddy, and they have a really hard push trying to do this. The Allies do win, although a lot of people are killed, and it's considered, the biggest attack that we've ever been part of. So we have been able to push the Germans back. In fact, the Allies pushed the Germans back so far that actually it's instead of being in France, right, and in Allied territory, they pushed them back so that we're now going to be in a position to actually go into German territory. So that's a pretty big battle. And your book kind of goes into some other details, but we're not going to worry about that. We're going to keep it the big picture. So while that's all happening, right? So we're in 1918 now. There's a lot of other problems going on in Europe, right? The Ottoman Empire is a mess. They can't keep the empire together. Austria-Hungary also has broken apart this time. They're having a lot of problems with their people. Remember, originally we talked about how Austria-Hungary, one of the problems was people wanting their independence from them, right? So that happens during this time period, and a lot of what you now think of countries like Poland, Hungary, right? They all leave and declare their independence. So their empire falls apart too. So basically, they're having so many internal problems they can't, be part of the fighting anymore. So both Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire surrender to the Allies. So that's really huge. And of course, Germany, that's their biggest allies. So basically, it's, the beginning of the end, and the Germans are starting to talk about, an armistice, an agreement to stop fighting. They're working on that. And while they're working on that agreement, there's a big revolt in Germany. And the people, right, have been so unhappy, and their soldiers kind of revolt too. So the Kaiser, that's the name for the German emperor or leader, he steps down, and Germany becomes a republic. And that new government says, let's agree to your terms and stop this war. So they say, there's kind of a famous thing that the armistice, the stop of the fighting, right, happened on the 11th hour, on the 11th day, on the 11th month. So that's kind of just a little thing that someone noticed, right? Because it was November 11th, and of course, the 11th month is November, right? And it happened to stop at 11 o'clock. So anyway, what are the terms of the agreement? Okay, so the agreement is that Germany will withdraw all the forces it has west of the Rhine River. Okay, so they'll go on the other side of the Rhine. They will get all their ships back and go back to like the Baltic Sea, right, close to them. And they're going to give up a lot of their equipment. Okay, so they're going to lose out quite a bit by this agreement. And we'll talk more about that final treaty next time.